I was a frustrated, angry young man who was pissed. And so I'll say something, when my mom died, I was relieved.
Really?
I was relieved. Now, it's taken me a long time to come to that place. But I will, saying that out loud, I'm not ashamed of it. Because the reality is, man, we have to make space for hard things to be said when people die.
Yeah. Welcome to the Revive Podcast. I'm your host, Freddie Romero, and I am so excited and thrilled that you're with us to join us on this conversation today. If you've yet to subscribe on YouTube, please do so and hit that bell notification button so that you are aware whenever we drop a new episode. And if you've not left a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts, do so right now. It helps us immensely. This is the podcast that helps you live out your redefined purpose in your circles of influence by showcasing some great conversations with people who are already doing that. And today you will be thrilled with our guest today. I'm excited because on the podcast today, we have David Leonard. He is a native of Long Beach, a seasoned professional with nearly 2 decades of experience in the nonprofit sector. Over the years, he has dedicated his efforts to various causes, including after-school programs, supporting Iraq and Afghanistan War Veterans, and combating hunger. Currently, David serves as the executive director of New Hope Grief Support Community. The organization's mission is to bring hope and healing into the lives of, how do you say this, David?
Bereaved
adults, children, families through connection and support. David's personal connection to grief stems from the loss of his beloved mother. This experience led him to seek solace at New Hope, where he joined a grief support and embarked on a personal journey towards healing. Through this process, he redefined his life without his mom. Inspired by New Hope's mission, David became actively involved as a volunteer camp counselor, providing support to school-aged children navigating the challenges of loss. These volunteer efforts catalyzed David's continued involvement with New Hope. This is such good stuff. His first experience with grief, coupled with his profound compassion for those dealing with loss, uniquely positioned David to understand and address the diverse needs of the grieving community. Through his dedication, New Hope continues to be a beacon of support, fostering hope and healing for those in the midst of grief. And if there's one thing that we do as humans is experience grief in various forms. David Leonard, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Revive Podcast today and have this conversation with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Freddie, for allowing me to be in the space today. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me.
Yeah. From the very get-go, I've been a part of, and I keep echoing this, but I've been at part of the Revive community for about 5-6 years now. And one of the things that was immediate to me was the fact that there was a group that was navigating grief and loss. And I was like, oh man, that's cool. So is that like a class? Is that like a program? And then they were like, no. It's a whole organization.
Yeah.
And I mean, growing up in church, I've heard of other organizations that, give food to the poor, clothe the homeless,
yes,
have shelters for families in need, send donations to missionaries overseas.
Yes.
I'd never heard of an organization that focuses on walking with people who are going through grief. That to me is beautiful. David, give us some of this, in your introduction. We talked about some of this backstory. How did that come about for you?
Yeah, well, grief, right? You nailed it on the head. No one is not going to be touched by it, right? We're all going to grieve in our own way, in our own time. And 1 out of 1 people die, right? And so that means 1 out of 1 people are going to grieve.
Yeah.
And so for me, all of us have a narrative and a story, right? That we're living out of and that have got us to this point in our lives. And so for me, I also want to just kind of note before I dive in, I want to honor and recognize that although I work in death, right, that I want to honor and recognize that there are other forms of loss, right? Also, it could be incarceration of a family member, it could be deportation, abandonment, maybe foster youth, foster care. These are all forms of loss, and I'm sure we'll touch a bit on that later. But for me, this idea of death started for me. I mean, one of the early experiences I recall is just my folks early on when I was around 10 getting divorced. And that was a deep loss, a sense of family structure and loss and all that comes with it, all the secondary losses. But fast forwarding, kind of the root or a primary cause of that was that my mother battled and dealt with addiction, right? And so she battled an addiction with opioids, and that is a really, really strong force, right? And if you've ever known someone or worked with folks who struggle with that, it's hard to break.
How long did she deal with that?
For a very long time. I think, she probably dealt with that as a young girl and young woman, and then, just trauma from her childhood and things came back. And I think without seeking or receiving proper support, that it was difficult for her to navigate that and eventually carrying that burden, carrying that pain, right? Because whatever we don't express becomes repressed inside of our bodies, and the body keeps score, right? And so if you're carrying that around and you don't feel as if you have a healthy way to share that, then of course it's gonna eat us alive, and the body will keep score. So for her, I think it was years coming, and not feeling a place of solace in her life or having people to go to help carry that burden became too much. Yeah. So over a period of time, I mean, my parents divorced when I was 10. Kind of fast forwarding, it became parentified, our relationship. So I was taking care of her after they divorced through my teen years and my younger adult years, trying to help her navigate the medical system and to find a place to live and to get groceries, et cetera, all while I was trying to go to school, find a career, figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And then really, really trying to be the best son I could be for her. Now I'm an only child, so I don't have any siblings. So I really felt that burden amplified. But her addiction eventually, Freddie, and a series of other bad choices led to her death. She was only 57 years young. Wow. I was 27 years old when she passed away. I think what I realized in all of that is that although I felt that my grief journey started with the passing of my mom, the reality is it started with the death of her father. Her dad died when she was only 10, and he was very abusive. My mother had two older siblings. They were roughly, I think, 8 and 11 years apart. What really breaks my heart is that none of my mom nor her sisters, none of them lived to be 60. They all died chronologically. My mom's oldest sister battled with addiction, alcohol. My mom actually gave her a kidney, donated a kidney. Wow. That didn't last. And then the oldest one was really bright and joined a cult and taught them how to grow their own food and agriculture. But when she became sick, they believed in the power of rocks and other forms of healing. And obviously with today's modern medicine against cancer, that's not going to work. No. So they all died. And I know that those two deaths and the death of her own father and that unresolved trauma, really, to your question earlier about how did it start, how long did she do it, that's really what was feeding into it. And so when I look at my own journey of understanding grief, it really started with the death of my grandfather, who I never met. Right?
Were you a believer when your mom passed away?
It's interesting. That's a great question. So I've been on and off in the church. As a kid, for any old school listeners out there, I was part of Awanas. And you'd earn your little badges for learning John 3:16. But I was on and off. As a matter of fact, I grew up in kind of North Long Beach, and I went to a church at the time. It was a Baptist church on the corner of Downey and Artesia. And now it's something else. But my mom was actually in the choir, the whole 9 yards. So I kind of grew up in the church. And then when my parents split up, I stopped going. High school kind of went back and then departed again in college. And it really wasn't until my mom's death that I kind of found my way back to my faith and exploring that and reconstructing it. So that's kind of where I was at in that.
So in that season, did you come back to faith because of your mom's death, or was it just happening simultaneously?
I think it was a both and, right? I think it was a both and in the sense that I was on this journey as a young man trying to figure out what I was doing, where I was going, how I was getting there, the people I was hanging out with, the relationships I had, while again still trying to help my mom. I'm watching her journey and the struggles and the hardship. Probably questioning God a lot of banter. Hey, your ways, my ways are not your ways. Yeah, but it doesn't mean I can't argue with them. And so just not fully understanding. And so her death, as much as it stung, right? And it still stings on certain days. It depends what day of the week it is. But recognizing that in that, and understanding, I think what I kept coming back to is that there's a narrative being written and there's a story being written. I know there's 66 chapters in the Bible. I'm a big fan and believer that we are an extension of those 66 chapters, that my life
Yes, sir.
Is continued. There's just no one documenting it, unfortunately.
Yes, sir.
At least this podcast will be recorded.
Yes, it will.
But that the story and the narrative that was being written. And so I think what I started to ask myself was like, well, is this going to be it? Is this going to be the narrative? Was my mom's life in vain? Did it have to start with an abusive father and trauma and addiction, and then just kind of then lead to me? And what was I going to do? What parts of my mom's life was I going to carry forward with me? The parts that I appreciated and liked, and what pieces of her life was I not going to carry forward, and the implications that had. And one of the pieces that I realized I wanted to carry forward was her faith. I had realized that despite her addiction and despite her shortcomings, because we've all fallen short of the glory, that what I know for sure is that my mom was loved by God. And that no matter where she found herself or how low of a place or what bad decisions she made, even in our own relationship, like raising me and saying really hurtful things to me, recognizing that addiction is a disease.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that those are, yes, I know we talk about all the time, those are chains that need to be broken and things like that. But recognize at the end of the day, it's a disease that requires professional people who are equipped and skilled and have wisdom and knowledge and experience in helping people break those chains.
At that age, did you know those things? Did you know, like, hey, her addiction is a disease? Or is that something that you learned after the fact?
I learned after the fact. I think I came to an understanding after the fact. Because when you're in it, when you're in the thick of the story, when you're one of the characters in it, you're just super angry. I was a frustrated, angry young man who was pissed. And so I'll say something, when my mom died, I was relieved.
Really?
I was relieved. Now, it's taken me a long time to come to that place. But I will, saying that out loud, I'm not ashamed of it. Because the reality is, man, we have to make space for hard things to be said when people die.
Yeah.
And one of the things I felt was relief. And you best believe that shame and guilt followed it. That how can I be a 27-year-old man and feeling relieved that my mom had died? But when you are trying to pursue a life and build a life and pursue things you feel that you want to do or your hopes and dreams, but knowing like you're constantly having to take care of this person who's making really dumb choices, who are constantly requiring your support, right? And having to show whether it's money, time. I think the part that was hardest for me is I knew that I was the antidote to her loneliness. Mother Teresa says the lowest form of poverty is loneliness.
Yeah.
And I agree with it. I think my saddest moments is when I'd show up and see my mom. She stayed in a boarding care, so she'd rent a room. That's all we could afford.
Yeah.
And I'd try and surprise visit her. And I'd go and I'd come in and I'd go to the room she was renting and I'd crack the door and there she'd be just zoned out, just on the bed, looking at a TV set, and me just feeling like, oh man, this really sucks and this really hurts. Because I know by me being there, that was life-giving and could bring her life. But I was at an age and a stage where that wasn't a priority, right? And so that's where the relief came from. But that's also where the shame and the guilt came from.
Yeah.
And I had to wrestle through that.
Yeah.
But I'm in a place now where I hope this is freeing for someone. I want to give you permission to feel whatever you feel in grief and loss, that it's absolutely okay, right? We're not going crazy.
So something's not out of bounds.
You're not going crazy. Everything you feel is normal. And most importantly, you have permission to grieve on your own timeline.
Yeah. During that time, you're a 27-year-old man. You're super young to be having these. A lot of the lessons we learn in life, we learn them in hindsight when we were a little seasoned, and then can look back with some newfound information. And now we can go back to those chapters and reassess, right? And during that time, who was around you? Who was helping you navigate this grief? Who was what were the relationships? Maybe what was the community like that you had, or was it absent? Like, just give me some context.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
In that,
believe it or not, I mean, we all go to high school and then we leave and pursue things, and maybe we stay friends. I've been fortunate. I've had a few key friends in my life from high school that have stayed around, that we've kept in touch, and we do life together. Those people for sure. One of my good friends had lost his dad when he was 16 in high school. We for sure didn't know how to show up for him. But then later, his lived experience kind of helped him know how to show up for me. Wow. Which was beautiful. Funny part of that, his mom also struggled with addiction, and thankfully she got clean and sober and was living her life. And she was around my mom's age, and so I actually ended up giving her I'd just taken my mom shopping at Kohl's before she died, and I'd given her all my mom's like the clothes I just bought her and the things, which ironically ended up being really hard because I'd see her in some of the stuff. Yeah, that's a whole nother story. Part of grief. Yeah. But he and others showed up. But I think what I would consider myself, Freddie, I was a high functioning griever.
Explain that.
So I was doing everything the world told me to do. I had a job, I had friendships, I had a girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. Love you, babe. And so just recognizing, I'm doing everything the Western world tells me I should be doing. Yeah. I'm going to the gym, but I knew deep down that I was off. Yeah. And that kind of entered the Iraq and Afghanistan War Veterans. I was working for the Salvation Army at the time downtown at the headquarters, and they had a new program, new funding to work with these vets returning from combat. So this is circa 08, 09. My mom died in 2007. And these veterans were coming into my office, had seen a ton of combat, experiencing PTSD, self-medicating, and one of the needs that came up was grief. It was survivor's guilt that it was my friend who died on a roadside bomb. It should have been me, or moms or partners coming in with their children saying, we lost mom or dad in combat. They'd already been gone for 2 or 3 tours. And now they're not coming home. Just that compounded loss and that grief. So I needed to find a resource. I didn't have a resource at the time. That's actually what led me to New Hope. Because I started researching and I found New Hope. They were here in Long Beach. I was working downtown LA at the what they call the divisional headquarters. And so for me, what I was seeing though through these veterans is their own kind of self-destruction. And I had realized like, wow, maybe if I don't seek the support I need, because I felt like I was just treading water, that I could potentially end up in that place, right, of self-medicating, making bad choices. And then I really started to think, wow, well, that's a lot of kind of what my mom's latter half of her life looked like. Yeah. And I didn't want to repeat, right? Yeah. So after I went to New Hope and met with the founder, and we discovered how we can help the veterans and their families and the kids involved, she kind of reached across the table and was like, and so David, what are you going to do with all your grief? And I was like, I'm good. Like, I don't have any grief. I'm way good. She's like, I'm starting a young adult group in a couple of weeks, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. So short of grabbing me by the ear and dragging me into the group, I got to the group. Fast forward a little bit, some things that happened, but she knew I worked with youth before in after school and wanted to know if I would be a counselor working with kids. And I was like, I didn't want to come to the group, and now you want me to volunteer? I'm just trying to work through my own stuff. However, it was around that time, to your point, that I was rebuilding with God and just recognizing, I felt like, no, you need to do that. You need to stretch. You need to go do that. And I did, and I'm grateful that I did, because I met a 5-year-old boy who told me, hey, David, you lost your mom, and I lost my mom, but together we're going to be okay.
A 5-year-old told you that?
Yeah. And I'll never forget. We were at a little camp. We were doing it in North Long Beach at an old Boy Scout camp that's now torn down. It's called Walter Reed. We used to do a little tent camping for a weekend with these bereaved children. And I met that kid, and he told me that, and I just knew in that moment. So I actually kept working for the Salvation Army, and I'd volunteer. Yeah. And I volunteered for several years before the opportunity came about to work at New Hope.
Yeah. What signs did she see that led her to believe that you hadn't dealt with your grief?
I think just in our conversations. I mean, she had been working in grief and loss. She was a cancer leukemia ward nurse for years and years at the VA, and was constantly dealing with families who were losing patients. She had her own grief experiences and lived experiences. So I think, she knew what the signs were. Yeah. And I know it's a short podcast. I mean, we won't get into it, but sure. There's types of grievers, instrumental grievers, intuitive grievers, grief styles. We all typically have a dominant grief style, and that will affect how we grieve. And so she kind of knew what my dominant style was, and knew that I could probably benefit from a group.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so David, how do we reconcile, as believers, the fact that we serve a good God, and yet bad things happen to us personally. Like things can hurt really well because, depending on what the theology you grew up with, there are certain camps of the Christian faith that will preach that if you're obedient to God, if you serve him, if you put your trust in him, you will live a blessed life. No foul or harm can come your ways, for by his stripes we are healed. And so therefore, if there is cancer in your family, addiction in your family, and illness, just believe in him enough, and your friend, your family member will be healed. How do we reconcile the fact that, yes, the Bible says that he is a good father, and yet still bad things, really awful things can happen to us?
Yeah, I think the answer is we don't reconcile it. I think it's a lifelong thing. And if we ever try to come to this place in our journey where we're trying to figure out why, we will forever be stuck in that place, right? And I said earlier, his ways are not our ways. And I said, yeah, and I get to argue that I don't agree with those ways, right? And what I say is that I think that we live in a really jacked up world, and crappy things are going to happen to really great people and to people who are maybe not so great, who've done things that are really harmful to other people.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be here trying to play God or know why those things happen. What I can speak to is this. I want to encourage people who are listening to know this, that God has really broad shoulders, that God's shoulders are big, that God can take whatever it is that you're dealing with inside, anger, guilt, shame, at him, because maybe you're really pissed at God right now because, Christians, we're great at cards and casseroles, but we are not great at holding sacred spaces for people to be and show up and be fully human. And if it doesn't look or reflect the way in which I think it should, then maybe I'm not going to accept you for where you're at on your journey.
Right.
And I think what we need to do as a body is we really need to be more accepting of those believers, non-believers, Jew, Gentile, you name it, because grief does not discriminate. We're all going to experience this. It's a universal, and grief is the great unifier.
Yes.
That we have to create a place and sacred spaces for people to come with their brokenness and their mess and their hurt and their anger and their shame, and maybe even joy, or maybe even or me saying out loud that, man, I feel relieved my mom died. I need to be able to say that out loud and know that the person looking across the table or the circle or wherever it may be is going to look back and say, wow, thank you for sharing that. That must be really hard. I don't know what you're going through.
I think a hard part.
And I want to add, the challenge is we've become a rescue society.
Talk about that.
So we want to quickly rescue people from their feelings and their emotions, right? And so the challenge with that is, we want to quickly replace it with platitudes. Well, they're in a better place. God needed them more than you. Oh, God needed your 4-year-old daughter more than you did here on earth? No, I don't think so, right? The reality is that daughter needed to be with her mom and dad. They needed her more, right? Now, I know for some listeners that might be hard to hear, but what I mean by this is we need to create spaces and honor and remember that everyone is on their own journey. And we try to rescue people oftentimes because of our own anxiety. Right? We say these things because we ourselves don't feel comfortable with the conversation or what's going on. And so we need to say platitudes or say things to try to rescue or silver line, right? Instead of leading with empathy.
Yeah.
Because empathy requires to tap into something inside of ourselves that we've experienced ourselves to then hold that space. We tell our facilitators that lead groups, get really comfortable with uncomfortable silence. So after you say, thank you for saying that, that must be really hard for you. I can't imagine what you're feeling. Because what we need to learn to do as Christians, not even just people, as humans, we need to learn, and the reason peer support works at New Hope is because what we're doing is we're allowing people to come once a week in their group to have others bear witness to their pain, right? Pain is meant to be witnessed. It's sacred, right? We need to create more spaces for people's pain to be witnessed, to be seen, to be validated, and to be heard, not rescued, right? Jeez. And so it's important that we're holding those spaces, because if we move quickly from I'm hurt, and as fathers, right? As fathers or dads or moms or grandparents or whatever, it's so hard to watch your kid fall and get hurt, or they're making a really not so great choice and you want to run in and rescue. But the reality is we really shouldn't. We really should allow them to fall. We really should allow them to experience that pain or that hurt so that they can begin to learn to navigate, so that their brains can develop, so that their frontal cortex and parts of their brains that manage decision-making and knowing how to handle big, hard feelings can be managed.
Right. Yeah.
And what we do to people is when we try to step in and silver line or rescue, is we're not allowing people the opportunity to feel the feels and to really understand and be in tune with their body and their mind and their spirit to know how to handle those big feelings, right? And so part of that, yes, we can absolutely go to God and pray and say, help me with this. Give me the courage, give me the people, God, who might come into my life and be willing to witness my pain and to hold that space for me, but not rescue me, but also show up and give me a double, well done when I need it, and some French fries.
Yeah.
But it's a whole spectrum of that, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want to your question, it's like, I don't think we can answer, well, why do those hard things happen to good people, or if I pray hard enough, or if I read my Bible every day, that these things are going to happen. No, because it's a broken world that we live in, and those things are going to happen. We started the conversation with that it's inevitable. We're all going to die.
Yeah. David, so I think that when we go through hard stuff, we feel that if we can come up with a reason, if God would just tell us why, that somehow that would relieve us of the pain we go through. Do you find that the experience with people who go through things like and then what happens with those? I mean, what would happen if God were to tell us why? Does it help the grief? Would it help at all whatsoever? I mean,
yeah, I don't think we can answer that question. I think we see that time and time again. I think a question, it's like, well, this person hurt my family member or killed my family member. We go to court, justice is served, they get the death penalty, or they go to jail for 25 years to life. It's like, but did that take away your grief? I can't imagine it did, because what I know about grief is that grief is not linear and grief doesn't know time, right? So grief never ends, it changes and we change with it. So the grief hole you have in your heart will remain the same size, but what can change is our lives, our relationships, our jobs, the people, the neighborhoods we live in, the church we go to or don't go to. All these things our life is constantly changing, right? But the grief hole stays the same size. And I don't think that because our circumstances change, that the pain or the amount of it. Now, the intensity of the pain may change, right? Year 1, year 2 versus year 5. I mean, I'm on year 15, going on 16 with my mom. Part of my thing now is teaching my son about his grandma and understanding that, and how do I have her legacy live on. But I think to know those answers, I don't know. I think it's different for every person, right? And to say that it would bring ultimate healing or relief, it can't be an absolute. What I do believe is that it is a combination of things. It's a combination of having people in your life in a tribe. We know that we say this all the time, right? We suffer in isolation, heal in community. So true of grief and loss. It is a very isolating experience. You feel like you're the only person who could be possibly going through this until you come to a New Hope grief group. And then you're like, oh, there's 10 other people. There's 20 other people who have lost a wife, lost a son or daughter, had someone die to an overdose, died by suicide, right? I think all those things, that's why I say it's the great unifier.
Yeah.
Because now we're connecting over pain.
Right. You mentioned something that sometimes we're good at, the cards and casserole.
Yeah.
We're not good at showing empathy. We've discussed this, you and I personally, because man, you're just such an open book and you're such an easy person to just be open with. But after going through 2 miscarriages, after years of infertility, for me that was so hard to express. Express and deal with, the sadness of it, because it's like, oh my gosh, God answered our prayer, because we've been trying to start a family for a long time, and then we miscarried twice. It's just like this very euphoric, and then just like hard, immediate crash. Then you start to like kind of measure your pain versus someone else's, well, I never held a child in my hand, and other people did, or other people have lost kids that they've raised for 5-10 years. So maybe you start to suppress your pain, your grief, because it's not as bad as someone else's, As a pastor, you hear what other people go through, and then you think, well, maybe I'm not going to share, or as a believer, I'm not going to share what I'm going through because it's not as significant, or people just don't understand it, So, taking that first step and vocalizing that we have it.
If it's mentionable, then it's manageable, right? And I think we own it. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our families, and we owe it to the community at large to share it, right? That we know that burdens are not meant to be carried alone. But I will say this, we never want to compare grief and loss, right? We say the greatest grief you're experiencing is the one you're experiencing right now, right? And so recognizing that your pain and your loss through miscarriage is equally and deserves the space to breathe. That's losing my mom or losing fill in the blank, right? And I think when we compare grief, and we experience this in group, right? Believe it or not, this is why we actually had to create suicide loss groups, child loss groups, because we recognize a term they use for like 9/11 or the Holocaust is catastrophic loss, right? Losing a son or daughter, losing someone by suicide, a lot of stigma, a lot of trauma. Like those things are really, really heavy. It doesn't belittle the fact that someone who lost a grandparent who's 90 or a mom and dad who's maybe in their 50s, all equal. The pain and the suffering and the grief is real because it's real for that person. Yeah. But I think to your point, I want to encourage people, you have to share it because grief waits for you, right? And that was my problem. I said I was a high functioning griever. What I realized is the grief was just waiting for me. He's like, he or she is like, I'm waiting for you. Like, when are you gonna start talking about? Because I could feel it, like I was drowning, right? And we see this a lot. Usually when people call into our support line, they're usually at that place because they're realizing like, okay, this is not manageable. Like I gotta do something. And I wanna let people know, grief is our response to love, right? Grief is our response to love. And you are not broken. You are not someone who needs to be fixed. You are someone whose pain needs to be witnessed, right? And you need to know that you're not alone. And so it's a journey. And so by opening up and talking about it can be so freeing. We need to give those things space to breathe and to live, right? So that we can get them outside of us. And that is a great first step in honoring and recognizing that we are a grieving person. And the hardest step, I think, Freddie, for people is recognizing the permanence of the loss. We use Dr. William Morton's 4 tasks of mourning. It's the first step is the permanence of the loss, right? By coming to a support group, we're acknowledging that they died.
Yes.
By saying those things out loud, I'm acknowledging. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we could do a whole podcast on this, just this idea of culture and the way that culture and religion impacts death and grief and loss, and how we celebrate, and how Latinos or Blacks or other cultures celebrate. Yeah. And do, are you going to do a repast or celebration of life? Or you get, right? What are we doing graveside? What are we eating after? Are you allowed to wail in the front row? Are you not? The way, and the reason it's so important, getting to the crux of your question, really, by you, especially adults, by you saying those things out loud, by you crying, by you being emotional or whatever, you, number one, are giving permission to yourself, but more importantly, you're modeling for children what healthy grief looks like, right? Where do children learn to grieve? Well, they learn to grieve from the adults in their lives, right? And if we really are going to be a tribe and a village, or body, then we owe it to our children and our youth to begin modeling vulnerability and grief and loss. They need to know that it's okay to be down here in a valley and just like, man, I feel like I can't even make dinner right now, and crying and losing it, to then an hour and a half later, like, let me get you to soccer practice. Yeah. This idea that grief ebb and flows, but what we're doing is giving permission. I can't tell you how many kids we work with in Long Beach Unified who say, number one, I'm told, don't ever talk about it. Yeah. Don't talk about it unless it's Dia de los Muertos or All Saints Day. Yeah. Don't mention their name. Don't bring it up. You're gonna make them sad. Yeah. These are all just misnomers and misconceptions I think we have about grief and loss. And so we encourage adults and people to say, no. You fully need to live into it. You have permission to grieve just like your kids have permission to grieve, but you got to model it and give them permission to grieve. Got it. Because if not, they're walking on eggshells. And guess what? Now they're carrying all that emotion and feeling inside of their body, and they're walking around feeling, well, where am I supposed to put it? And then we wonder why their grades are slipping. We wonder why they're acting out. We wonder why they're angry. We wonder why they're fighting with their friends or their siblings. We wonder why we can't get them to listen to us. On top of all the other things, if you live in poverty or coming out of the pandemic or all these other things, the things going on in the world, this all exacerbates grief. Yeah. And if you already had pre-existing conditions of anxiety, depression,
Right.
You name it,
Oh.
and then you sprinkle grief on there. It's a recipe and ingredients which could potentially be this volcano waiting to erupt. And so when we say things like, "Oh, don't talk about it," or "Don't bring it up," or we're no, right? Or just trying to be strong. And I get it. People who are grieving are trying to do their best. They're trying to do their best, and their hearts are in the right place. I can't tell you how many, newly bereaved moms who lost a husband or dads who lost a wife. They're just holding on by a thread, man. And they're just they'll come to our camp or they'll come to an event. And it's like the first time they've ever brought their kids to anything or talked about it. And just when we get the adults by themselves and the kids are doing their stuff, it's just like, they just let loose, which is great. Because for the first time they feel like they have permission to, because they've been trying to be so strong.
They've been trying to hold it down for.
But once they leave, they realize like, oh no, I actually can break down in front of my kids. And I'm no less of a man or a woman. I'm being fully human and I'm being fully present with my children. And then they join in the crying and we're all crying.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
But then we're off to grandma's or we're off to practice or we're all going to make or maybe we're going to have a really good conversation about, hey, dad's death anniversary is coming up. So instead of all of us just being isolated in our rooms on our tablets or our phones and not talking about the fact that the death anniversary is coming and it's only been year one, that we might actually get together as a family and have the hard conversation about like, what do we want to do? What are ways that we might honor dad this year? Like, what do you guys want to do? Right? Do we want to go to his favorite restaurant? Do we want to make breakfast? Do we want to go surfing? Hey, we were really wanting to get, that swimming pool built or the kitchen remodeled before he died. Like, is that something we want to continue pursuing? Hey, some things I like to tell parents too is like, we do these activities with families. It's like, hey, if the person was here right now, what do you think they might say to you? Like, I know you're graduating high school and I know they can't be here, but if they weren't here, what do you think they might say to you? And here's what I know they'd say to you. They'd be so proud of you, Freddie. They'd be so proud of the young man or woman you're becoming. And if they were standing here right now, they would not stop clapping. Like, they'd be the last person to sit down at your graduation to cheer and root you on, right? And I think we're so uncomfortable having these kinds of conversations, right? Just like I was afraid to name, like I was relieved that she died a little bit. We have to start creating those spaces. So for listeners, it's like, here's the easiest question you ask someone. Hey, how's your grief going this week? Just naming it. Not how are you doing? Or, hey, I know that, the death anniversary of John's coming up, your husband. I can't, how's it been for you and the kids? Hey, is there anything you need? Like, do you need a night off? Do you need a mani-pedi? Could I take you for a massage, self-care? What do you guys need right now? And don't veer from it. Don't be afraid to lean in if you're supporting your grieving person.
Yeah.
Lean into it. Because believe it or not, we say we die twice, Freddie. We die once here on earth, and we die the last time that our name is spoken.
Oh, that's powerful.
So I always say their name. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to, their greatest fear is that their person will be forgotten. So don't even veer around saying, oh, your mom, like say their name. Right? Now, if they had an endearing name like Nana, or you can say that. But if it's a coworker or maybe a neighbor or just an acquaintance at church or work, hey, how you been since your husband John died? I know the 1 year's coming up, and I can't imagine what you've been going through. And I just want you to know if there's any way I can support you, maybe pick up some dry cleaning, like give practical ways. Don't leave it open-ended, because sometimes grieving people don't know what they need.
Right.
One of the things we encourage people in group or in grief is to like write a list of things you need. Everyone's there for the cards and the casseroles. Let me know what you need. But 6 weeks out, 10 weeks out, you don't know.
That's a lonely period.
So write a list down. What are some things people could do for me that are practical that I need?
Yeah. Going through, like you talk, so it's like, so on the side of the person grieving, say it, name it, talk about it. On the side of the community, the friends, in church, we experience a lot of like Christianese, language.
Yes.
You just quote comforting scriptures that don't feel very comforting when you're going through it. And I remember going through something super, super hard, super, super sad. And a friend of mine, he took me out to coffee, and we sat down, and he asked me, "Man, how are you holding up?" And I went on like 5 minutes just letting him know how I felt, how depressed I felt, how I didn't want to get out of bed. It was like 3 p.m. and I just had no motivation to like leave my bed. And like for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing this extreme sadness. And I don't know what to do. And then I'm worried about my wife because she's grieving in a different way, et cetera, et cetera. And we're just talking, and I get done. And he just looks at me and he goes, yeah, I normally don't know what to say in these situations. But I'm so sorry you're going through this. You know, like for me, that was very special because I was almost, I paused so that he could now tell me the scripture.
Yeah, you were waiting.
I was
like
waiting,
a punchline.
I was waiting
to your pain.
Yeah, I was waiting for like his version of the remedy. I was waiting for his version of the prescription that I needed to take in that moment to just feel a little bit better. That would give me some hope for tomorrow. And you know, his honesty about, hey, I don't know what to say. And he knew this about himself. He's like, I really don't know what to say in situations. But he took me out to coffee. Like he picked me up, bought me the coffee, sat with me, asked me the question, and just
witnessed your pain, held sacred space, and shut up. Right? What a great friend. He did all the right things.
So why do you think we go so easy? Why do you think it's harder for us to do that? I feel because I've been guilty of it. Now going through this, I'm like, I'm repenting of times where other people have lost and experienced grief, and I've come quick with my theology, with my scriptures, with my sermon. Why is it so much easier for us to come with what we feel would be comforting words and not be okay with not knowing what to say or just sitting in silence?
Well, I think it goes back to our own anxiety of not, right? We don't want to feel awkward, or we want to feel like we can rescue, or he's the rescuer, right? So if I can't rescue, then maybe he can rescue, because this is way bigger than me and I don't know how to fix it. So then I'll point you to maybe who I think can.
Yeah.
Right? When in the reality, no, this is a human and flesh matter, right? This is a flesh matter. And so the reality is that not being equipped. And I think one of the things that New Hope we really try to do is create grief awareness and sensitivity. So we do a lot of trainings. We train the Department of Mental Health. We work with community workers. We train teachers and faculty and school districts on how to become more grief competent and confident, and more grief sensitive. And these are a lot of the things we talk about. So Christianese, whatever language you want to use, I think what we need to learn to do is just use the language of love, right? And maybe really getting inside of ourselves. That's why I say empathy. You have to tap into something deep inside yourself and remember pain you experienced to kind of know how they are, so that then you can respond in a way that would make sense. I mean, and your friend did that. And that is my encouragement. Get really comfortable with uncomfortable silence. Grieving people are not people to be fixed. We need to witness them. And here's what I'll say. Genuinely, people who have complicated grief, traumatic grief and loss, they will require therapy, and individual therapy, and that's okay too. We're not going to pray this out of them. We're just not. Like, again, this is why people go to school. This is why God created different fields of study and the brain and how it works and chemicals and all that, right? Dopamine and different things. And so when people go through these really hard things, sometimes they require professionals to help them.
Yeah.
And so, there's been times too, if I can recognize it, I'll say, have you considered? Right? Have you considered maybe talking to a therapist, or do you have access? Have you considered grief support?
Yeah.
Maybe that is a vehicle.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that goes along with saying, I don't have the answer and I don't know what to say right now. But I do know that there are people out in the world who might be able to help you with this.
Yeah.
And if you're open to it, I'm willing to point you, and then maybe follow up with some resources.
Yeah.
But I also want to remind people too, don't be upset when people don't respond. You send text messages, hey, how you doing? After the funeral or a month in, and you just get crickets. That's okay. They're not mad at you. You didn't hurt their feelings. They're just grieving, and we need to be patient with them, and we need to give them that space. And then people ask me, well, then when should I text them again? Or when do I reach out? When you feel like you should. Right? As a friend, I mean, we should be having cadences and rhythms, I think, with our friends, and know them, and and know how to, when to show up, and you'll text someone it's the right time, or you'll drop a phone call or do a voice recording. Yeah. And they know how to respond.
Yeah. Here at Revive, we love to, talk about this, not doing life alone, not grieving alone. I imagine a lot of, I know for a fact, a lot of our life group leaders do listen to the Revive podcast. And if there is a place, I would imagine, that believers express their grief, or at least can identify that someone is going through grief, because in life groups you share updates about what's going on in your life, etc. How can a life group come along a couple or a person, an individual who is grieving, mourning the loss of either divorce or death, or are all those things different? Or
I mean,
what are some practical, I guess, maybe there's just a practical thing.
Well, there's the beginning. We talk about the cards and the capitals, and we joke, but those are important. Those, like in the very beginning, those are very meaningful. I encourage people to do it in an organized way, so people don't end up with like 50 casseroles in their freezer and throw half of them away, and then there's like the whole world hunger thing. And but like being mindful and getting organized. But then I think for the long term, I'm a big fan of like designating a liaison from the group. Who might check in on that person during the week so that they don't feel overwhelmed. Like, why do I got 9 people from a group checking in on me? In life groups, we tend to gravitate or have deeper relationship with certain members of the group.
Right.
Yeah. That's just how it is. That's how groups work.
Yeah.
Yes, you have facilitators and leaders, but inevitably you kind of have deeper bonds with people in the group. So, essentially you should probably be one of those people that the person already has a deep connection with. Most groups open up with a circle time and a check-in. So just maybe as the facilitators knowing that this particular person is going through this really hard season or just had a major loss, giving extra time for them to talk about that. But then also recognizing that you're not an expert. None of us are. We're only experts in our own grief. And then not being afraid to say, hey, there's new hope. Hey, have you thought about, even pastors now that are getting MDivs and stuff, like I know Biola, they're required to take so many classes and so many units in like social work, just recognizing that pastors are not equipped. You are not therapists, right? You are not LMFTs, licensed marriage family therapists. Some are, but more than often you're not. Yeah. And your knowledge and your ability to help people through mental health challenges is limited. And so I'd say the same for a life group, right? Yeah. Like recognize, what are your boundaries? Like what ways can we serve this person well? And then where should that also stop? And then where should we be mindful to then try and reach out to professionals? Yeah. And look, we can only bring people to water. We can't force people to go to the group or seek out therapy. All we can do is be a faithful presence in their life and continue to check in on them along the journey, right? Yeah. And they'll reach out as needed. And if they say, I'm good, I'm all right now, let that be. But I think it's just a constant check-in, and then recognizing, like I said, I'm a big fan of putting in your calendar like death anniversaries or birthdays or wedding anniversaries when someone's lost a spouse, knowing that that's coming. I mean, the life group could get together and fill out a card and say, hey, we're still thinking about you, and your husband, John, what a wonderful man he or she was, and we love you, and if you need anything. I mean, when someone gets that card in the mail, I can't imagine how you might feel, right? Very simple, but very practical.
Yeah, we have a lot of misses, and just sometimes it's just ignorance. We just don't know.
Yeah, we at New Hope, when people come through our groups, we send a 1-year death anniversary card to every client. I can't tell you the feedback we get from people like, wow, I didn't get, not one person called me this week, but then I got your card. And I was just like so moved. I cried, and just to know that there's a community of people at New Hope who are like rooting for me and love me and are standing in the gap with me, like made me feel so encouraged to get like through the day. Wow. So I just feel like, imagine like if life groups or the church like was doing that, right? And finding small ways to be intentional with that. Because I think sometimes we think it needs to be this grandeur gesture. Yeah. It needs to be like this lofty thing. Yeah. No, it really doesn't. It can be as small as that, right? So holding space, being intentional, and not rescuing people.
That's powerful. If anybody needed to connect to New Hope Grief,
what
are some of the things that you guys do, and how would they connect?
We're Long Beach local, but we have people coming from all over, Greater Long Beach, even Orange County, all over LA. We do virtual groups, we do in-person groups. Our 8-week adult groups are 8 weeks long. We do have regular, like kind of what we call general loss, maybe loss of a spouse, a family member. We have suicide loss, and then we have child loss. We go into schools, we do groups. And then one of my things that I'm really excited about is we do family programming. So if you're listening, I don't know when this is airing, but April 13th, we have a family camp coming up. It's a 1-day retreat. It's the only family camp in Southern California for the whole family to come and to be with about 15 to 20 other families who've all had a major loss and kind of travel and journey through the day together. We do bi-monthly family events. Like this last Saturday, we partnered with Remote Drums and another organization in the city, and used music. Sometimes our words can't express what we're feeling, but music can. So like we use drum circles and drums as a way to express. So we are always constantly incorporating the arts and being mindful of that. So we are here. We'd love to hear from you. You can go online and fill out an interest form. You can call our support line. I'm sure you'll put all that in the bio and the links.
Yeah.
We're on the gram. You can follow us.
Okay.
So, and we're always, and I'd say this, I'm proud of this fact. 85% of our facilitators that lead groups, Freddie, are alumni of our program. So we have over 100 active facilitators. 85% are alumni, and the other 15% are interns from local universities, social workers. But the fourth part of Warden's task is meaning making. Not making meaning of the death, but making meaning of our lives without the person.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these people come back, and the way that they're making meaning of their lives is that they're facilitating groups, that they're helping others through the same journey that they're on, in making sure that they don't suffer in isolation, but can find that same healing they found in community.
Come on now.
So it's powerful stuff. So maybe you're listening, maybe you're far in your journey. We'd love to hear from you. We're always looking for volunteers. So it's a both and.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David, for being here and taking the time to just give us some practical tools and some just have these very deep conversations that I know our church needs to hear.
Yeah. Thank you, Freddie.
Of course. Guys, I know you guys take a lot of notes. David said some really powerful things, and we need to be praying about these things. The church, oftentimes we can't live out a redemptive purpose because we haven't dealt with some of the things that have happened to us. And so we want to provide a space where if we want to equip you, we want to make sure that also we're creating space for healing. We're creating space for these conversations. And thank you to David and people like him, facilitators that are volunteering their times with New Hope Grief, actively looking to serve the community, the grieving community in this way. So I encourage you to plug in. All the links to everything that he does will be in the description. Thank you so much for joining us today in this conversation. I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Until then, God bless you. Peace.